This video is brought to you by Mubi, a curated streaming service showing exceptional films from around the globe. Get a whole month free at mubi.com/filmfatales.
Thy husband is thy lord, thy life, thy keeper, thy head, thy sovereign, one that cares for thee.
Yeah, but see, there's a difference between like and love. Because I like my Skechers, but I love my Prada backpack.
But soft. What light through yonder window breaks.
Does he have your number? 1-800-BIATCH?
Hello everyone, I hope you're keeping well. Today I thought I would take a break from the horror genre to focus on some films that really shaped a generation. Today I'm looking at the teen rom-com classics, 10 Things I Hate About You and She's the Man. Both of these films are loosely based on Shakespeare plays and fit into a broader trend in the 90s and 2000s to make teen-targeted adaptations of classic texts. What I think is so interesting about 10 Things and She's the Man in particular are their portrayal of feminism and gender. 10 Things is based on Taming of the Shrew and She's the Man is based on Twelfth Night. Both films alter elements of the play to fit the appetites of contemporary audiences, and I thought I would dive into each film to show how they update the plays and how this affects their portrayal of gender. Both films place an emphasis on feminism with feminist main characters, and She's the Man also plays with a gender fluidity that's present in Twelfth Night. Like the Shakespeare plays themselves, there's many ways to interpret these films, and my interpretation is just one of many, but I'll kind of address some ways that you could look at certain plot points or representations differently. I'm going to look at the cinematic context of Shakespeare films in the 90s and 2000s and then dive into the two films. I love both She's the Man and 10 Things I Hate About You. I grew up with these films, and this video isn't arguing whether or not they're good. It's just looking at certain aspects of their gender politics to see what the films are saying about gender and feminism. So, with that, let's look at feminism in these films. First, a bit of background on the Shakespeare boom of the 90s and 2000s. The boom started in 1996 with the release of Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet adaptation, titled William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. It starred Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes in the titular roles and was labeled Shakespeare for the MTV generation by critics. Prior to this, Hollywood had already been adapting classic texts for teens, like Clueless, which was based on Jane Austen's Emma. She's All That in 1999 was similarly based on George Bernard Shaw's play Pygmalion, and the commercial success of these adaptations led to a boom in the classic text to teen rom-com formula. These adaptations could be read as attempts to popularize Shakespeare or to make him seem cooler or more accessible to younger audiences whose only exposure to Shakespeare had been in schools. Roy Deschanel did a video on the popularization of Shakespeare called When Shakespeare Got Cool, and I would highly recommend that if you'd like to know more about Shakespeare's relationship with youth culture or the high-low culture divide. Unlike the other adaptations I mentioned, Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet retains much of the original Shakespeare elements. The plot and dialogue are largely unchanged except for some cuts and editing. The film's full title, William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, foregrounds the relationship of the film to the original play. Romeo and Juliet was heavily advertised on MTV, and the film succeeded in pulling in the highly coveted teen demographic. It is a decontextualized, camp, kitsch, gaudy Romeo and Juliet that blends Shakespearean dialogue with 1990s MTV-style editing and teen heartthrobs. The film was treasured by audiences and broke records as the first Shakespeare film to lead all films in box office receipts during its opening weekend. However, it's not surprising that critics and scholars have shown a polarized reception to an adaptation in which Romeo soliloquies to Radiohead while wearing a Hawaiian shirt and Mercutio is a drag queen. Franco Zeffirelli, who directed the 1968 version of the film, claimed it made a big joke out of the play and criticized the pseudo-culture of young people. Roger Ebert gave the film 2 out of 4 stars and stated that it was, quote, one grand but doomed gesture that will A. dismay any lover of Shakespeare, and B. bore anyone lured into the theatre by the promise of gang wars, MTV style. This boom of teen Shakespeare films dismantled what audiences expected from a Shakespeare adaptation, which up until this point had been mostly serious period pieces like the films of Kenneth Branagh. Later teen Shakespeare films map the skeleton of Shakespeare's plays onto the teen genre. Robert L. York charts the emergence of loose adaptations of Shakespeare from West Side Story to 1990s teen films. Such films are adaptations that adapt a story without language, that slightly alter characters' names for geographical or contemporary contexts, that transport every component of the play to a parallel placement without directly making explicit reference to the play itself, most times excluding the original's title. They do away with Elizabethan dialogue and modernize the dialogue to include teen slang and patterns of speaking. I'm pretty sure the original Taming of the Shrew didn't include the phrase crack whores, but I'm actually not 100% sure. As a result, these films more closely resemble a John Hughes movie than a Shakespeare play. Janet Maslin characterizes John Hughes movies as treating teenage concerns of dating, fashion, and popularity as if they were matters of state. Which is correct, they are matters of state, thank you very much. She notes that most of Hughes's adolescents, quote, care about sex appeal more than sex itself, and have no real money worries, even if they go to school with much wealthier peers. They care about high school status, about being liked and accepted, and about the compromises that go into winning their friends' approval. These films revolve mainly around upper or middle class, straight, suburban, predominantly white teens, so don't expect any discussions of race, or class, or sexuality in these films, because instead of class divisions, there are cliques. There are several films within this teen Shakespeare canon, including O, based on Othello, Never Been Kissed, based on As You Like It, and Get Over It, based on A Midsummer's Night Dream. I'm choosing to focus on 10 Things and She's the Man, however, because they foreground feminism and gender more than any other film. So without further ado, let's talk about some teen films. 10 Things I Hate About You is based on Taming of the Shrew. The film follows a group of high schoolers in Padua High School as they navigate romantic relationships. Bianca is subject to much male attention, but is forbidden from dating by her father unless her older sister Kat also dates. New student and army brat Cameron falls head over heels for Bianca the moment he sees her, which results in the only original line from Shakespeare's play.
I burn, I pine, I perish.
Cameron and his friend Michael plot to find Kat a date so Cameron can date Bianca, tutoring her in French in the meantime. With the help of rich pretty boy Joey, they enlist mysterious bad boy Patrick to woo Kat. The two go back and forth as Patrick attempts to earn the affection of Kat and they fall for each other. Meanwhile, Bianca has a crush on Joey, who is just with her because he wants to take her V-card, and when she finds this out at prom, she realizes her true feelings lie with Cameron. When Kat finds out Patrick got paid to date her, she is angry and upset, confessing her feelings in a poetry reading in her English class. Patrick earns back her trust with a promise of honesty and a Fender guitar, and the two end up happily ever after. The Taming of the Shrew remains a controversial play, and I'm just going to outline the general plot so that you can see the similarities and differences between that and 10 Things. Taming of the Shrew centers on a pair of sisters, Bianca and Katharina, who harbor a strong dislike for one another. Their father, Baptista, wishes to marry off Kat before Bianca, but Kat has a sharp tongue and doesn't want to marry anyone. However, Petruchio appears as a suitable suitor and marries her for financial gain. After their marriage, he takes her to his house and attempts to break her spirit by starving her and refusing her sleep. Several people attempt to woo Bianca. One man, Lucentio, poses as a Latin tutor in order to get close to her, and the two eventually marry. The men have a bet over who has the most obedient wife, so Kat makes a speech at the end of the film to show her obedience to her husband. And this speech has long been a dividing factor among audiences and critics. Some interpret it as evidence of Kat's taming. She's newly subdued and devoted to being an obedient wife. Others read it as Kat performing obedience, while secretly remaining loyal to herself and perhaps working in conjunction with her husband, who is a match to her feisty spirit. There's no right or wrong interpretation of the ending. Different directors have staged it differently to lean more towards one interpretation, and I find that 10 Things I Hate About You has a similarly ambiguous ending, which I'll get into in a little. The trailer and the marketing for 10 Things doesn't foreground the film's relationship to Shakespeare at all. Shakespeare's dialogue, setting, and plot are all translated onto the contemporary teen flick. The poster foregrounds Kat, both highlighting her empowerment and cashing in on Julia Stiles' star power. Shakespeare is present in some aspects of the film, though. He's taught in the classroom, and his sonnet forms the basis for Kat's poem at the end. The English teacher, Mr. Morgan, insists on Shakespeare's enduring relevance.
I know Shakespeare's a dead white guy, but he knows his shit.
Mirroring the filmmaker's attempts to make Shakespeare's story fit the lives of teenagers. Kat's friend, Mandela, is a self-proclaimed lover of Shakespeare, and she and Michael dress in Renaissance costumes for the prom. Despite its connections and allusions to Shakespeare, you could easily watch this film without knowing that it had any relation to Taming of the Shrew because of how distanced and different it is from the original text. 10 Things does away with the harsher elements of the play, namely the spousal abuse. It alters the taming to be more playful, with paintballing and verbal sparring between Patrick and Kat. Patrick is actually shown to be quite gentle and caring towards Kat, looking after her while she gets too drunk and refusing to kiss her when she's inebriated. He makes a show of himself in front of the school by performing Can't Take My Eyes Off You to make Kat feel better about being rejected. His actions, though initially motivated by money, are shown to come out of love for Kat. 10 Things translates the original Katerina's stubbornness and sharp tongue to the 20th century by making Kat a feminist. The film's introduction sets Kat in opposition to the other girls in her school by cutting from them listening to mainstream pop to Kat blaring Joan Jett's Bad Reputation alone in her car. Kat is the butt of sexist jokes from those around her.
Is there any chance we could get Kat to take her Midol before she comes to class?
My insurance does not cover PMS.
She's not very popular with her peers, and when Cameron and Michael try to find someone to date her, men laugh or scream in terror at the thought of dating her. Kat's feminism is very much rooted in the second wave feminism. She reads The Bell Jar and the Feminine Mystique, and she asks her English teacher to include Simone de Beauvoir and Charlotte Bronte on the syllabus. The second wave movement largely ignored the concerns of women of color and queer women, instead focusing on advancing the rights of affluent white women. As a white upper-class woman, Kat's political focus is very narrow, and her lack of intersectionality is called out by her teacher.
I know how difficult it must be for you to overcome all those years of upper-middle-class suburban oppression. Must be tough. But the next time you storm the PTA, crusading for better lunch meat or whatever it is you white girls complain about, ask them why they can't buy a book written by a black man.
However, though I appreciate how Mr. Morgan calls out Kat for her narrow focus, I think it undermines the feminist aspect of the film. Because Mr. Morgan says that there should be a black male author on the syllabus, when he could have said that there should be a black female author, marrying the two causes instead of separating them into either race or feminism. He's completely right to say that Kat's focus is too narrow, but I think the same could be said about him. I think another way the film undermines Kat's feminism is that her feminist passions arose from the actions of a man. It's revealed that she became an ice queen after Joey slept with her and treated her poorly. And furthering the characterization of Kat as a man-hating feminist, Cameron indirectly asks Bianca if she's a lesbian. And though Kat is a feminist, it feels a lot of the time like the film is undercutting her feminism rather than endorsing it. The characterization of the two sisters comes across in their costuming. Bianca's wardrobe is very feminine and infantilizing. She wears soft pastels, lots of pink, flowy dresses and cardigans. Bianca conforms to the mainstream ideals in order to be popular in high school. Unlike her sister, she doesn't identify as a feminist to avoid scaring off the boys that she desires. Kat, on the other hand, wears a lot of blacks and dark blues. She wears some skirts and dresses, but favors camo pants in general, illustrating her rejection of hyperfemininity and her refusal to conform to feminine norms. There are some other key changes between the play and the film that again alter the overall message. In literature, films, TV, etc., the father of a household can be read as a symbol of patriarchy as a whole. In the play, Kat and Bianca's father, Baptista, is a harsh patriarch who wants to rid himself of his eldest daughter without much care for her opinion or well-being, which fits with the lack of rights afforded to women in the Elizabethan era. In the film, however, their father is much softer and benevolent. His control over his daughters is shown to be care because he doesn't want his daughters to end up pregnant. Also, despite initial objections to Kat going to college in New York, he relents and supports her decision. Here, the patriarch against which Kat rebels is shown to be kind and well-intentioned, so her rebellion seems misplaced, which again undermines her feminist revolt against the patriarchy. Despite the feminist characterization of Kat, the film still falls victim to portraying the female characters in the male gaze. When Cameron first sees Bianca, she's walking in slow motion and music plays, and the camera gives the audience time to marvel in her beauty. Likewise, the camera lingers on Kat's body when she dances and highlights men watching her. So her feminist beliefs and actions are undermined by the style of the film that objectifies her. Like Taming of the Shrew, I think you can read the ending of 10 Things in different ways, and critics have been divided over 10 Things' treatment of feminism and gender. You could see Kat settling into a relationship with Patrick as a subduing of her feminism and a conformity to the social norms of high school. She shifts her belief around prom from thinking it's an antiquated mating ritual to attending it. But that being said, she does go to the prom so that her younger sister can also go, rather than just going for her own benefit. One could say that Kat has met her match in Patrick and has realized that you can hold feminist beliefs while also making the choice to enter a healthy heterosexual relationship. Michael D. Friedman argues that the representation of feminism is positive. He says that Kat moves from second to third wave feminism, marrying her political beliefs to freedom of choice, and this is a sign of growth. On the other hand, Jennifer Clement disputes Friedman's thesis and claims that the film, quote, exploits the generational divide between second and third wave feminism in order to ridicule both forms of feminism and to suggest that feminism in general is outdated, irrelevant, and even harmful. Clement points to the lack of any positive older women in the film and how Kat and Bianca's mother left them prior to the events of the film as evidence for its devaluing of the older generation of women. I think something to factor in is that Kat will be attending Sarah Lawrence in the future, which is a prestigious liberal arts college known for its focus on equal rights, so her feminism and her education doesn't stop with the film. The two sisters, though they begin the film as stereotypes of the smart good girl and the pretty stupid popular girl, do grow outside of these stereotypes over the course of the film. Bianca is shown to be smarter than Joey when he asks for her opinion on his headshots.
Yeah, it's more...
Pensive?
Damn, I was going for thoughtful.
And at the end of the film, she chooses the less popular man who will make her happy and punches Joey for his objectification of her and her sister. This violent encounter echoes what we hear earlier in the film about Kat kicking a man in the balls. Kat, in turn, learns to accept the affection of a man who respects her while retaining her feminist beliefs. Again, there are several ways to read the ending of this film. I think it is somewhat reductive in the portrayal of Kat as a man-hating feminist at the beginning of the film, and I don't know whether the end of the film fully makes up for that. Overall, though 10 Things updates its source material to foreground a feminist protagonist, the more damaging and disturbing elements of the play are altered or removed altogether. So Kat's feminist rebellion is less about systematic oppression and instead isolated instances of disrespect that are largely overcome at the end as Kat enters into a heterosexual relationship. Before talking about 12th Night and She's the Man, I want to introduce a little bit of theory about gender that provides a useful framework for my analysis. Judith Butler, whose pronouns are they, them, is a prominent figure in conceptualizing gender, having published a book called Gender Trouble and a highly influential essay called Performative Acts and Gender Constitution. They challenge a binary view of gender and argue that gender is not prescribed from birth. Instead, they argue that it is a social construct that is enforced by a series of repeated acts. For example, wearing makeup and a dress every day, engaging in stereotypical feminine activities will make you appear as a woman, and society will treat you as such, regardless of your biological sex. Being born female does not necessarily mean that you will be viewed as such, but the feminine presentation or performance that you engage in does. That's all to say that your sex does not determine your gender. Because gender can be performed, different performances lead to different gender expressions, and this notion challenges the gender binary. These ideas have made their way into the mainstream over the past few years, with growing awareness of and discussion about transgender people, non-binary people, and gender identity in general. The notion that gender is performative is particularly interesting in terms of film, TV, and theater, where we can quite literally see gender being performed. 12th Night and She's the Man both show different genders being performed in quite overt ways, so I think that Butler's argument is useful in considering how She's the Man shows gender to be performative. For this video, I'm going to refer to Viola as Viola when she is not in disguise and Vibastian when she is in disguise, in order to avoid any confusion between the real Sebastian and Viola in disguise. I'm going to use she, her pronouns to refer to Viola and they, them for Vibastian, again to just avoid any confusion between Vibastian and Sebastian. She's the Man follows a girl named Viola who is an excellent soccer player. Her twin brother Sebastian is a musician who secretly goes to London for 2 weeks to play at a music festival. After the high school coach cuts the girls' team, Viola impersonates her brother Sebastian and takes his place in the rival school, Illyria, to play on the soccer team and prove her skill as a player. At Illyria, she's roommates with Duke Orsino, who she quickly develops feelings for. Duke has a crush on Olivia, who falls for Vibastian because of their emotional sensitivity. Vibastian agrees to help Duke get Olivia if he helps them get better at soccer, and Vibastian ultimately earns a spot as a first-string player. At a carnival, Viola must switch between disguises, and she kisses Duke while working at a kissing booth. Later in the film, Olivia sees the real Sebastian arrive at Illyria and kisses him, thinking it's Vibastian. Duke sees this encounter and is angry with Vibastian and refuses to work with him the next day as they play a soccer match against Cornwall, Viola's old school. However, Viola exposes her disguise, and everyone now knows about her and Sebastian. Illyria wins the soccer match against Cornwall. Viola apologizes to Duke for lying, and he forgives her, escorting her to the debutante ball. At the end, Viola is in Illyria and playing on a team with the guys, and her and Duke are a happy couple. I feel sorry for you if you haven't seen the film because it is pretty confusing. She's the Man's plot contains the skeleton of the 12th Night plot, and I'm just going to highlight some differences instead of going through the whole thing. The play revolves around a pair of twins, Viola and Sebastian, who are separated in a shipwreck. Unlike the film, Viola doesn't take the place of her brother, but instead disguises herself as a young man, Cesario. She serves and falls in love with the Duke of Illyria, Orsino, who in turn is in love with Countess Olivia. Upon meeting Viola Cesario, Olivia falls in love with her, thinking she's a man. After 7 years, Sebastian returns to Illyria and Olivia marries him, thinking he's Cesario. Viola then reveals her identity, but remains in her male costume, and she and Orsino plan to marry. There's more to the plot and subplot than that, but it kind of gives you a general idea. Like 10 Things, She's the Man doesn't foreground its relationship to Shakespeare in any of the marketing materials or even in the film. There's no mention of Shakespeare like there is in 10 Things. The only allusions are the character names, the basic plot, and the setting. She's the Man also harkens back to the 1985 film Just One of the Guys that follows a woman trying to break into the world of journalism by disguising herself as a man after her talent is repeatedly overlooked for her good looks.
Cherry's a girl who wanted to be taken seriously.
I am going to be a reporter.
But her body kept getting in the way.
She's the Man was written by the same screenwriters as 10 Things, Karen McCullough and Kristen Smith. McCullough and Smith could do 12th Night, but Shakespeare could never do 1-800-BIATCH. The reception of She's the Man contains some classic belittling of teen and tween girls and their interests. In the Austin Chronicle, Mark Savlov writes, "The inclusion of real-life footballer Jones is a bizarrely appropriate touch, but She's the Man's optimal demographic of tween and teenage girls isn't likely to recognize the hulking, hooliganistic Jones for the astonishing footballer he once was." Yeah, you're probably right, but this film isn't about Vinnie Jones's talent, it's about Viola Hastings' talent, so I don't get why you would bring this up in a review. The review has such a kids these days, like old man finger wag vibe to it. It's also interesting to compare the reception of this film to comedies where men dress up as women. Men in Drag has long been an aspect of comedy, think Some Like It Hot and Mrs. Doubtfire. The male actors' attempts and often failures to come off as convincing women is often played for laughs. However, in the reception for She's the Man, the male film critics criticized the film for its lack of credibility in Viola's disguise and were quick to point out Amanda Bynes' unrealistic acting style. In their review of the film for the AV Club, Keith Phipps writes, "Viola comes out of the makeup process looking more like a prepubescent boy than an athletic teen, which is a constant distraction. But it isn't as big a problem as its star's interpretation of teenage manhood, which, for some reason, involves talking like an effeminate Alabaman. On the other hand, performances like that of Robin Williams, Tony Curtis, and Jack Lemmon, which also exaggerate gendered stereotypes and mannerisms, are lauded for their comedic prowess. Why? Sexism. Also, in the tradition of cross-dressing in cinema, men who dress as women are seen as a man in a dress, and it's played for comedy. However, when a woman dresses as a man, it's often to access the male privilege and the rights that she is denied as a woman. The absurdity of Bynes' masculine performance, which is comically overt and stereotypical, serves a purpose. Her dialogue is a parody of the stereotypical American male patterns of speaking. It exposes both her gender performance and hypermasculinity itself as absurd and arbitrary. There is an issue, however, in how Vibastian proves their masculine prowess. Viola has her attractive friends pretend to be Vibastian's exes, which finally validates them in the eyes of their male peers. Duke calls Vibastian man for the first time after this, confirming that he views them as one of the guys. Though it is parodying hypermasculinity and women's objectification in a way, it nonetheless paves the way for Viola's assimilation and success instead of critiquing it. And this is bolstered by dialogue with her brother when he justifies his relationship with Monique.
Why do you even date her anyway?
She's hot. It's a guy thing.
As well as the objectifying looks of the boys. Vibastian's interaction with the soccer players is just one instance that highlights how Viola Vibastian's gender performance and expression affects how they are perceived by and treated by others, illustrating Butler's theory of gender performativity. When Viola looks like a girl, acts like a girl, she's treated like a girl by her friends and family. However, when she's disguised as Vibastian, everyone around them treats them as a boy. And this shows how different gender presentations affects the perception of gender, challenging the gender binary and the belief that sex is linked to gender. She's the Man goes further with this by destabilizing gender expectations and subverting gender stereotypes. The girls play sports and get into physical fights, and the guys cry, write poetic song lyrics, and scream at the sight of spiders. Duke objects to the objectification of women.
Which one would you rather see naked?
Why do you always do that? Why do you always talk about girls in such graphic terms?
Duke Orsino, an ally to women everywhere. By having the characters engage in behavior that is contrary to what is expected of them, the film highlights the arbitrary nature of gender roles and stereotypes. The film also shows how gender roles and expectations are prescribed, mainly through Viola's engagement with femininity. Her mother's preoccupation with the debutante ball highlights her desire for her daughter's conformity to feminine ideals. The debutante activities show the socialization of women to be demure and ladylike. At one point, the chairwoman tells Viola to chew like you have a secret. This femininity is stifling for Viola. She has a nightmare where she's trying to play soccer, but her poofy pink dress keeps getting in the way, literalizing how the constraints of forced femininity are hindering her from pursuing her passions. At the end of the film, she attends the debutante ball, but her dress is much more modern than those her mother picked out, maybe suggesting that she's found a way to express femininity that doesn't conform to traditional stereotypes. Because of the film's play with gender, there's a lot of homoeroticism to this film. Duke and Viola bond when Viola is disguised, and he tells her that he was falling for her as Vibastian. Olivia also falls for Viola in disguise, and given the knowledge that Vibastian is a girl, these interactions also have homoerotic elements. I found fan edits of Olivia and Viola, and I think this really speaks to the desire for some lesbian representation, but unfortunately the film stops short of delivering any real queer representation. The closest we get is a hint that Viola's gay-coded friend Paul may start something with Duke's friend Andrew. As Viola is walking down the runway at the debutante ball, Paul fixes Andrew's lapel in a cute, intimate gesture. In fact, She's the Man could have had a lot more queer representation if they deigned to. As Viola is disguised as Vibastian, there's several moments that could be taken as Vibastian being trans, like the tampons in Viola's bag or her female register coming out when she's talking on the phone. Vibastian is forced to lie about their purpose for having tampons and hides their binder. The anxiety of using communal showers, the discomfort of the binder, the anxiety around shirts and skins in sports, all seems to speak to the trans experience. There are a lot of threats of Vibastian being outed, much in the way a queer person would be outed. However, despite the apparent fluidity of gender that the film plays with, male and female is always portrayed as a either-or situation. There's no question of transgender or gender non-conforming people. This is hammered home in the end of the film when the real Sebastian is confronted and Viola's disguise is exposed. Both twins must flash parts of their body in order to affirm their gender. Their conflation of their body organs with their gender subscribes to the belief that your sex and gender are linked, which is an outdated concept and again excludes trans or gender non-conforming people. At the end, Duke says to Viola that things would be a lot easier if she just stayed a girl, squashing any further possibility of gender fluidity and implying that Viola has returned to her rightful state as a girl. Throughout the film, the audience at no point forgets that Vibastian is in fact, Viola, a girl. Unlike Twelfth Night, in which Viola dons a disguise and stays in it for the remainder of the play, She's the Man has this constant slippage between masculine and feminine. Viola often switches between her masculine and feminine clothes, but even when she's disguised as a guy, she still has these breaks in character in which her true nature comes out, whether it's talking emotionally about a breakup or asking Olivia where she got her shoes. Instead of being an identity, Vibastian is repeatedly shown to be a disguise, a costume. Though the gender boundaries are permeable, the film doesn't set out to explore any gender ambiguities, but rather implies that there's ultimately one true identity and you can't exist in between. Though She's the Man has some feminist themes in showing that girls can play soccer just as well as boys, if not better, it does flatten the systematic oppression of women to be an individual problem, much like 10 Things. The film is very early 2000s in its girl power message, in that it's pretty much spelled out for the audience.
It's a scientific fact. Girls can't be boys. It's as simple as that.
Okay, Dr. Seuss. This isn't necessarily a bad thing considering that it's targeted towards a younger demographic, but watching it in 2022, it feels quite didactic. Though Viola succeeds in her goal of making it on the boys' team, the same can be said for her friends and teammates who are left with nowhere to go once the girls' team is cut. Viola proves her worth as a soccer player, but it's more like she is an exceptional player rather than showing that all girls can play as well as boys. Also, the Illyria coach's statement that they don't discriminate based on gender makes it seem like the other coach is misogynistic, just one bad apple in soccer coaches. So overall, it flattens the systematic oppression of sexism and patriarchy to something that can be overcome if someone puts in enough time and effort. It's interesting that some elements of the film seem to be less progressive than the play that was written 400 years ago. And though I think that it fails in its portrayal of gender fluidity by reaffirming the gender binary and the link between gender and sex, I do think it's important in that it introduced a lot of young people to a more fluid concept of gender than was mainstream at the time. Speaking of films bringing lesser known ideas into the mainstream, today's video is brought to you by Mubi. I've been using Mubi for several years now, and I'm actually so excited to be working with them. I also feel like it's like a rite of passage for video essay YouTubers, so I've made it. Mubi is a curated streaming service, a place to watch beautiful, interesting, incredible cinema. Mubi premieres a new film every single day. From iconic directors to emerging auteurs, there's always something new to discover, and you're sure to find something that fits your personal taste. I love the amount of thought and care that goes into their streaming selection. Each and every film is handpicked by a person, not an algorithm. It's like your own personal film festival, streaming anytime, anywhere. You can try Mubi free for 30 days at mubi.com/filmfatales. That is mubi.com/filmfatales for a whole month of great cinema for free. By tracing 10 Things and She's the Man back to their Shakespearean roots, we can see how the films alter and adapt elements to fit contemporary tastes. But some things, like the gender fluidity of Twelfth Night, get lost in translation and end up being less complex and progressive than they originally were. I will continue to watch fan edits of She's the Man to fix the film's lack of queer representation, and I hope that in the future a new Twelfth Night adaptation could come out with trans or non-binary characters, because I think that would be really interesting. I would love to hear your interpretations of these films, especially like the ending of 10 Things and its portrayal of Kat's feminism, or the gender binary in She's the Man. Alright, my darlings, that is all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in my next one.